Chapter 29 The Leviathan. A month and a half later, the four of us sat in the main cabin on tall steel stools. We were hunched over the metal table studying the star chart. Bren, Red, and Ansa fought for the sextant. If we travel that vector, Bren argued, we'd lose precious time in backtracking, days perhaps.
But we're on schedule, Bren, and we're fully supplied.
Ansa sighed, and then she exploded.
Would you relax? It's more middle ground, for Arcana is pulling us toward her as we speak.
She snatched back the sextant from Bren to project via hologram and reconvey the coordinates she fought for us to travel along.
And besides, we need time to make sure all the gear is up and running. Time to make sure we're all on the same page. We need a few practice runs, a bug check, you know? What if we don't spot Nazwa for some time? We'll more than likely have to push out again. I say we go according to my plan, not your gut. Sir.
Lieutenant, I am no stranger to orbital mechanics and have not been educated merely by my gut, Bren grumbled.
I know, and I apologize.
I think if we go either way, we're going to be just as friggin' bored, Red said, only to agitate Bren. Bren sipped coffee. Bren, having just emerged from cryosleep, looked like complete hell. He pushed his specs to the bridge of his nose, sighed, and said, Okay, let's give this a break for an hour or two. You may be right, I need to wake up. Is the heat actually on in here? Aye, Captain Ahab, sir. But the thermo can't read below all the hot air your two lovebirds keep belching out, Red cracked, as he climbed the ladder to an upper deck to oblige Bren. Sip your coffee, and we'll find your whale. Red's voice carried over the sound of heaters whirring, their warm currents spilling throughout the ship. Outside the control room, space was no longer distorted. The Corsair had slowed down to place us well beyond Arcana, a day's travel beyond her orbit. Through the window, Arcana, a giant orb with prominent orange rings, was absolutely captivating. I could not take my eyes off of it. Ansa seemed hypnotized by its beauty as well. Never thought I'd see her in person, she said, staring beside me. We avoided being spotted by the occupying Trican armada, whom we could see via instrumentation were in close orbit of Arcana, formerly a Banish colonial planet. Ansa and I spent that morning going over all the gear, the computer equipment that we needed to use once we found Nazwa. We went over it all again and again as she stressed the importance of the scripts she had loaded into my Trican rig. Remember, you only initiate these when I say. Are you going to tell me what they are? I asked. An insurance policy, she answered cryptically. Up top, Bren stared out of the control room window, brooding over a steel cup from which steam arose as he mumbled with Red about where to move the ship to begin our work. Red piloted the Corsair into the nebula clouds that Ansa anticipated would be located in this sector. We hid behind a group of asteroids within a large and pink dust cloud and turned all unnecessary systems off as we waited. Bren decided that Ansa's plan for our sweep would be the better option. He trusted her judgment. They were a good team. From within the cloud, the Corsair floated. Ansa, Bren, and I watched LCD screens passively, waiting for a sign of Narzawa's approach, scanning for whale sign, as Red called it. We were kept in good spirits and in the silence of it until, as the hours built upon themselves, until they became days. Boredom replaced the enthusiasm of our camaraderie. The silence was then run through by Red's outbursts as he paged through a novel I could see open before him. He would shout to entertain and agitate. An insane silhouette reading to us.
Consider the subtleness of the sea, how its most dreaded creatures glide underwater, unapparent for the most part, and treacherously hidden beneath the loveliest tints of azure. Consider all this and then turn to this green, gentle, and most docile earth. Consider them both, the sea and the land. And do you not find a strange analogy to something in yourself? Brenne.
I'm gonna kill this guy, Ansa.
Oh, suck it up. You certainly have a knack for new hires.
Hour upon hour passed this way, each of us scouring grid patterns on the large overhead screens in the main cabin, looking for the slightest omission to give Narzawa's presence away. After our third week of hunting, I was awakened by a voice.
Oi!
Red yelled, pointing at the monitor and tossing his tattered paperback against the dash. We all ran to the Corsair's main cabin. Red sat pointing up to a green cloud showing on the screen. What do you think? Seems like a small destroyer, probably bound for Arcana. Bren grumbled. This is just the wrong position. Let's pull out and get closer to the planet.
Oh, Ahab!
We'd be no better off, Red started. Well, you stop calling me that, by God, Bren growled. Bren was sweating, stressed. He then sighed and started to laugh, and so did Red. Red was pinching the bridge of his own nose. He wore his reflective sunglasses on top of his head to pull his long hair back. Yeah, okay. Sorry about the Moby Dick stuff. What do we do now? Red asked.
Ansa said, Perhaps you're right. We've been here for days. Let's try it Bren's way.
Fine. Let's go. I'll start her up, Red said, then moved back to the control room to make ready and take us closer to Arcana. But before he reached the end of the walkway, there was a sudden white flash of light that flickered through the entire cabin of the ship. It was like lightning. What the holy hell was that? Red said, and then he ran the rest of the way to the control room. We all followed, and emerging from behind the obscurity of our asteroid, we saw it. The Leviathan. It glided through the nebula, a black beast floating past us, descending downward, uncomfortably close, and yet oblivious to us, toward Arcana. I had never seen anything man-made so large in all of my life.
Ah, she fucking blows, Ahab.
We stood in shock as Narzawa seemed to be slowing down, her massive engines pulsing. Well, I'll be damned. I don't know what to say, Bren said. Oh, good call, Ansa, Red said, signing quotes with his fingers. I think that's what you'd say. I mean, that's what I would say if I were you, Captain Sir. Red needled, an obnoxious grin beneath his mohawk hair. Ansa laughed and said, Let's suit up, stealing Bren's line. As she passed him, she affectionately bumped Bren with her hip. I'm unworthy, Lieutenant. Bren sighed and he kissed her cheek as they descended into the G-150. The 150, like a large manta ray in appearance with its wings turned down, a sensor dish on its back, dropped away, and the Corsair was left alone, hidden in the velvet gases behind us. We slowly followed Narzwa. Ansa, who was piloting, spun the craft so it seemed to float like debris. I sat in the co-pilot seat and focused on my Trican-emulated machine. Given our current speed, Ansa said we would probably catch up with Narzwa in 4 to 6 hours. In the meantime, she began to slow and piloted the craft through a ship graveyard. "Oh, there are some of the blocks," Red marveled, speaking of the destroyed vessels of Wilhelm's Black Fleet. He almost seemed to salivate as we gave silent chase in the Black Sea of space. "What I'd give to make a salvage run on some of those." As we caught up, Ansa had me bring the cloak online. I did so, and she pulled the G-150 out of the graveyard, skimming along its edges as our eyes pressed toward Narzwa, her black hull nearly completely obscured by space. In time, we made our approach, catching up to the Leviathan and then stopping. I scanned for a good place to tether as Ansa looked for any sign of trouble. The goal was to tether before Narzwa stopped completely. "On the rear above the engine block?" I suggested. "Good." Ansa sighed heavily. "Okay, let's do it." Ansa floated us downward, light as a feather, saying to me, "On my command, just a half tick of reverse thrust, okay?" We floated down, and Narzwa slowed beneath us as we were right over her, and then Ansa said, "Now." I applied a tap of my thumb against my controls for a half point of reverse as Ansa deployed the tether expertly. Its magnetic seal was not making the slightest bit of sound in our cabin. We were now a leech on the back of the beast as the 150's padded landing gear softly touched its metal skin and the electric magnets adhered us to it. An audible sigh could be heard from Red in back of us. "That's how you board a ship, love," he whispered.
Speaking from experience, are we, Mr. Cridian?
"What do you mean by that?"
Why do you think old Ahab here hired you?
"Fucking federales!"
Oh, come now, your secret safe as houses with us.
Ansa teased. We waited and waited. Was it safe? Were we discovered? We made no sound for several minutes. When Ansa's hands stopped shaking, she let go of the controls. "Okay," she said, and I immediately brought our communication system online. I handed each a tiny tracker to be worn in the eye, a contact lens that would transmit visual and audio data between us and communicate it with the GPS on board the 150. I inserted my own. Before me, software interfaces appeared in alignment with my depth of perception, screens floating in the space before me. The device also responded to thought impulses, transmitting them and displaying well-formed communications as text right before your eyes. If we intended via what was called a Psi-link, we could transmit our actual thoughts. By focusing on the various links on the temporal menus, data would simply shift into view. Right now I was looking through Brent's tracker, seeing his point of view. We were both looking at me. "Remember to shift your focus onto something in the room, Joshua, and the GUI will recede," Ansa reminded me. "And don't overuse it, especially the Psi-link." "Yes, less is more," I replied, remembering her training. "Look, we have time, but I'd like to at least figure out how to get in." Bren said from behind me. We waited for Narswa to open her bay doors to deploy the fleet she was carrying. Ansa readied her tiny drones, each the size of a paperclip, to completely survey the situation. They're only good for 8 hours, but we should be able to find a way in for you. I could then see the drone's varied points of view on the virtual and multi-partitioned graphical user interface before my mind's eye. Tiny craft fanning out, separating and photographing their targets, the Narswa. We processed the data fed to us by the spy nats, as Red jokingly referred to them. I only tended to the data streaming in, running the software that pieced together their separate feeds into a 3-dimensional diagram. It took hours upon hours, and as I did this, Ansa was quietly working on another task away from the pilot seat, working with Bren. I could only hear fragments of their conversation. "Hold still," she'd say. Red sat next to me, taking Ansa's place at the helm. He watched the spy gnats at work, nervously chewing his gum. After a time, the micro-drones began to die, their feeds becoming static, each a square of partitioned real estate on my plane of vision, and then a green tile among the others, dead. The program finished collating all of the data and then gave us a near-complete rendering of the port side of Narswa. "Shall I deploy another?" I asked Ansa, my back still turned. "No," Bren said. "Let's wait till they have dropped the fleet off. We'll need to transmit all of this to command, so get that tunnel ready." A tunnel was in reference to how we were to encapsulate our messages back home, disguising them as Trican communiques. The actual message would be safely encrypted, hidden within a garbled and fake Trican transmission. It would be disregarded as a failed message. Bren wanted to transmit once the other vessels hidden in the giant belly of Narswa were unloaded. Our broadcast would then be camouflaged among the other communicating ships. I observed that Arcana was now a little closer, her sheer size becoming more obvious to me. She was massive, the largest planet in the Banks Isothin. Still, we were well beyond the safe distance where the trikes would open the heavy armored bay doors that were still sealed shut. I admired the 7 levels of them along the elongated bottom fin shown on the 3rd model now projected before us. I looked for anything that might be a possible access point on the ship's hull. "I found something," I said. Bren crawled over to me. I saw his face, wet, shiny, and stinking with a kind of glue. He leaned over my shoulder to see. "Yeah, that might work." It was a gun battery. Beneath its turret there seemed to be a maintenance hatch. "I'm sure they did not leave a key under the welcome mat. I was only kidding about that," Red quipped. "No, but there is an access panel there, you see," Bren murmured. "If we can break the code on it, it might open." "What about decompression?" Ansa asked, and she pulled Bren back toward her. Bren hummed to himself, working the scenario out. "Look," Ansa growled. "If we hack that panel directly, it will send an alert. If we decompress the chamber, they're going to know about it." "Then I need to get out there on the hull and slip through the bay doors," he answered. "You friggin' stupid," Red shot. "What the daring will do, Khoridian," Bren mumbled. "And I know you're no stranger to such stupidities." Yeah, all right, you big hero, out you go." "Come on, Ansa. I can't bear waiting around anymore." Okay. "Give me 30 minutes, Bren," Ansa said, applying more glue to Bren's face. She then began to apply strips of what looked like skin, light orange in color. In about 30 minutes, Bren affixed a second orange contact lens into his eye, both of which were now stretched. Squinty. His metamorphosis was complete. Ansa combed his hair back with thick, dark blue oil, and then applied a purplish color to Bren's lips. His face was lined by the shingles of orange skin. He was now a trike.
A handsome devil,
Ansa joked. Bren looked into the hand mirror, and then handed it back to Ansa. Perfect, he said, almost excitedly.
Don't forget these,
Ansa said, handing Bren a set of fake, oversized teeth with massive incisors. Bren shoved them into his mouth, bit down into them, and then began to speak in trike, his voice deep and commanding, his orange pupils penetrating. Ugh, happy friggin' Halloween, was all Red could say. That makes a hairs stand up on the back of my neck. Bren, the trike, went to work, putting on his pressure suit. He had every intention of crawling out to the docking bays to gain entrance. He needed to get inside to find a way to access the trike network, to bridge our machines to theirs. On the hands and feet of his black suit were magnets. He would use them to slowly climb. Ansa kissed the faceplate as Bren loaded himself into the decompression chamber of the tether. He began his journey against the massive black hull. I watched his feed on my monitor. You getting this, Josh? He asked, and I saw as he did, looking out into the blackness of space, barely able to distinguish the surface of Narswa from the background. He was camouflaged perfectly in his black pressure suit. Yes, can you hear me? I answered. Clearly, yes. Okay, I'm going to climb down the stern. Just sit tight. There were 3 docking bays at Narswa's stern and 4 aft. Bren patiently used his magnetic grapplers and descended the vertical length of her 3-mile-long hull. My own hands began to sweat with the sound of his breathing as he climbed. Anything could go wrong. Red chewed his gum, his nostrils flaring, his forehead beaded with sweat. He obviously hated the waiting too. After hours of this, we heard Bren whisper, If the worst happens, Red, get back to the Corsair. If you can, search for me floating about, but do not get caught. I don't intend to get caught either, he said. I knew he meant he didn't intend to get caught alive. Let's not make a martyr of ourselves, love, Ansa said, picking up on his sudden self-loathing vibe. I caught an impression just then. I thought back to the party on Planet Bane and the guilty look on Bren's face upon seeing Tila, my dreaming partner, the Nadsade refugee he had orders to send back to the death sentence awaiting for her on her home world of Planet Banks. Bren popped his head over an edge that he had come around. He had finally made it to one of the bay doors. He sat there waiting. From our vantage point, one of Arcana's moons emerged directly over the top of the ship, a bright and purple crescent. Finally, there was a roll of thunder. We could feel and hear it in the cabin. Narswa rumbled, and from Bren's point of view, we could see the cargo bay doors slowly begin to open. Ansa deployed another set of spy nets. They fanned out and made their way to Bren's position. The bay door in front of Bren was a gaping mouth, and inside we could see the complex pattern of inner scaffolding, rails that held battleships in place in the zero-gravity enclosure. The gnats whizzed by Bren. He did not even notice them. "Are you getting this?" he whispered.
"We've got it. You be careful,"
Ansa said. "Okay, they're coming out." As he said that, we could see out of our own windows small ships leaving from the aft side, protectors, small battleships. In Bren's feed on my monitor, they floated past him, giants within the giant. Bren stayed hidden, waiting for the fleet to exit. Ansa and I busied, preparing our report to transmit to command. With this information, the new Black Fleet would be prepared. The surrounding space was aglow with the activity of the Triton ships, making us exceptionally nervous. We went unnoticed, though, as they formed up. Bren then rose, popped his head deeper into the cargo bay opening, and seeing his chance, climbed inside along the inner walls until he found a platform. He climbed beneath the steel stairway. "Sneaky bastard!" Red laughed. With his arms raised enthusiastically, Bren quickly fell in line of trikes wearing similar pressure suits, engineers who celebrated their perfect deployment by likewise lifting their arms. Bren followed them into the nearby decompression hatch, nestled deep within the yellow corridor. Soon he was surrounded by hundreds of others. He spoke to a few of them in trike, making gestures, expressing something like, "Oh, I forgot something." Then he fell back from them, allowing the droves of them to simply walk past him, leaving him alone. He then removed his suit. He emptied his breast pocket of a small glass vial containing another set of micro-drones, spy nets. Bren quickly released them. He then, after grooming himself, walked about the ship, avoiding eye contact with any passerby. He stole a red-visored engineering cap and picked up a tablet from a nearby bench as he pretended to check various panels. He was looking for a terminal. In a few minutes, he found what he was looking for. "Why, that's one sneaky bastard," Red said, admiringly.
"Well, you haven't seen the half of it,"
Ansa bragged. I saw Bren's point of view whirl left, his heartbeat spiking, as shown on his vital statistics. He was staring into the face of another trike. "Are you the one from 6? The trike asked. "No, he's on the way," Bren said, without missing a beat. His vitals fell like he had taken a sedative. He then asked, "Where is one to find a damned working terminal in this section?" "Ah, this way, Ensign," the trike said and led the way. He brought Bren right to it. Bren nodded and then ignored his guide, imitating the Trican mannerism of cold direct interaction. The guide disappeared, suspecting nothing. Bren then removed a device from his pocket. "A little help here," he said.
Okay, there should be a thick cable in the back of the terminal. Look behind the panel,
Ansa said. Bren found and opened it, then said, "There's at least 3.
Wasn't expecting that,"
she said.
"Stand by."
I could hear Bren's nervous breathing as crackling and distorted feeds. "I think it's this," I said, showing Ansa an image of the tech on my Triton rig.
"Oh, good job,"
she said.
"Bren, it's a redundant circuit of sorts. The first cable in order will need to stay in place. Remove the one most to your right and plug the codec converter in there. Then cable the other end to it."
"Right," I heard him say. "Plugging in the gizmo now. How are those drones doing?" "Great," I said. We began to receive data on the cargo from the feed Bren inserted. 650 vessels, 40 of which were large fighter carriers. All this we would report to the Black Fleet, which was on their way. Bren placed the panel of the terminal back in place and quickly left the room. I saw the fleet was now a great distance away, and Narzwa began to turn round.
"Bren, I don't think you're going to make it back inside,"
Ansa said, and I noted that 3 hours seemed to have vanished. Narzwa was emptied of her massive load. "Damn. Well, I guess I'll be spending the night," he said.
"It's really better, love. One trip,"
Ansa said reassuringly. "You've got to figure out how to blow this bird up," Red said. I heard a long sigh in my comlink. "I was hoping for a sandwich first," Bren joked. "Okay, no more comm, only when I need help. I'm out." And from that point on, we heard and saw nothing from Bren. He was in the hive, digging in and setting his next play in motion. I watched the drones floating in Narzwa's corridors, gathering information. They eventually died off. We prepared ourselves for the jump, strapping into our seats. An hour at high impulse speed in Arcana was but a small red dot. Ansa locked the G-150 down, the magnets clinging hard to the hull of the Leviathan. With the completion of Narzwa's graceful retreat into the massive nebula, all her bay doors were again sealed. She was quiet for several moments, and then there was only a bright, white, hot light, a powerful flash. We were no longer in the Banks Isathene, and with every passing second, millions of miles were being placed between it and us. There was only all-encompassing light, no time, no space, no edges of myself for an inconceivable measure of time, because time was irrelevant. It might have been a mere moment as viewed from outside this journey, or perhaps a long, unquantifiable amount of mere moments. But the whole journey was unknowable from within it, as no one was really here taking the journey. This infinite shine subsumed the very idea of travel across distance, and only upon being released by its supreme, bright, indivisible reality did the notion of travel or of mission return. Now the ideas of Narzwa and of Walayan, of world and of space, the heavenly bodies forming, presenting themselves in the alien configuration of the Triton galaxy, came back as we slowed. It was there again, that slippery fish silver scales flashing beyond comprehension. And my breast became heavy once more, knowing that this travel, this journey, this trekking was pointless. I began to regret and doubt and resent the distances I had traveled, for here, in the coldness of space, in between the glow of illuminate heavenly orbs, nothing had really changed at all, least of all me. What was I to do? Medea implored me not to leave the room, and now, having completely misunderstood, I found myself certain to be light years away from that room again. Banks, left so entirely behind me. What could I do with this sudden tension, distance and threat, and my yearning, and my fear? We were merely tethered to the Leviathan, and if she should shake us from her back, we would be stranded at this impossible distance. I shivered and felt as if I were drowning in the cold blackness of that distance, and yet I was called to re-enter it, willingly. I then let go of it all, my head dropping to my chest. We did not move from this perfection, the light travel. Our minds had been stopped, and like cold-blooded creatures, stiff from lack of heat, sat motionless as orange gas clouds passed by the windows. The clouds were distorted by the bejeweled windows of the G-150. Narzwa was slowly spiraling, as if hypnotized by the radiance that engulfed her. The G-150 was freezing inside. There was a chime gently in the background indicating that we needed to load an oxygen tank. I wiped condensation from the cockpit windows as the rest of the crew came to. Hansa lightly shook her head, sighed, and said, "Is the cloak still running?" I checked. It was. Red crawled to the rear of the ship to install a fresh O2 tank. He was the quietest I had ever seen him, working, not talking, and then taking his place again at the pilot's seat. He closed his eyes to rest. We slept in shifts, waiting for Bren to check in. After 6 hours, we became nervous. "Come on, Bren," Ansa mumbled to herself, steam pouring out of her mouth. A deep sigh after a long draw from her thermos. I wrapped myself in a thick canvas and fur covering, trying to keep warm. Red looked upward through the cockpit window and pointed. We looked up and saw the large planet, Bulayan, above us. There were 2 beetle-shaped ships, no doubt released from the confines of Narzwa, floating about in space outside. They were heading to the planet. I had an unsettling feeling about them. Why were these ships not delivered with the others into the Banksisathan? Instead, these grimy and bloated crafts seemed to have been transported back as passengers independent of the missions of the Trike military. The vessels became smaller until they dissolved into the brightness of distant sunlight reflecting off Walayan. Bren's feed came alive. I was seeing through his eyes again. He was taking pictures of Narzwa's large engines. Data was streaming to us, information he had collected during the jump. He had not stopped working. "Good man," Ansa said, and she began her own work to hack at the Trican systems. "Josh, see if you can establish some escape routes for him," she said. The mission mapped out several scenarios, the best being that Narzwa would turn around in 1 month and return to Arcana. The second was that we would have to go to Walayan to restock supplies and reattach to Narjwa in 2 to 3 months. The other scenarios involved hiding among the trikes, hoping to gain access to another liner, which was not likely. Or as Bren put it, such a scenario was likely the best time to take a cyanide pill. Bren, to our amazement, stood in the very bowels of Narjwa. He quickly dropped to the floor and rolled into deep blue dimness. We were looking at the underside of the massive components within her engine room, under which Bren was crawling, sliding along his back as he pulled himself deep within the craft and beneath black, oily pipes. "I've set at least 12 of these," he said softly, placing a series of sophisticated charges in strategic places. They would not explode until a certain threshold was achieved, Ansa explained. "He's weakening the shielding," Red said. If Narjwa returned to the Banks Isathene and was attacked, as we hoped, Narjwa's aft and starboard shields would react, call for more repulsive power, and eventually implode, allowing for enemy rail guns to damage the hull. Bren was prepping Narjwa for the Black Fleet. I watched his greased hands working in the shadows. "I think that will do it," he whispered. Eventually, I was able to interface completely with the Narjwa. My trike rig was one among all of their terminals. Soon all the addresses for cameras, doors, and hatches, as well as communication channels, were loaded neatly into a table of links and into the plain view of my lens piece, all corresponding to the 3-dimensional map that the spy gnats created. I grinned. I switched to cameras and found Bren. I verified that he was in engine room 6. He stayed concealed. Seeming to know where the cameras were, I then set up remote connections to the cameras in the adjacent areas. The place was crawling with activity. It was as if I was sitting at one of their own communication terminals. I wondered how Ansa was able to reverse engineer it with such accuracy.
It took a team of many. We combed through the wreckage to do a lot of testing, repairing some of the trike vessels. Much of it is just like I showed you with the 101. Nothing's really all that original, really, she said. Never you mind that. You just listen to what's being broadcasted. And keep an eye on those cameras, she said. He's going to need you to be his eyes and ears.
Bren, there are at least 6 men coming your way, I warned. He rolled out, dusted himself off, picked up his stolen tablet, and resumed his maintenance act in one graceful motion. No one questioned him as he moved in the rhythm of their expectations. He left the engine room and walked among the other countless crew members, then made his way to a crowded room, a mess hall. "What's next, Chief?" Ansa asked. "FTL," Bran communicated silently, a thought, the words appearing as text against our vision as Bren boldly passed through the hall in silence and out through another entrance. He climbed up another steel staircase. "No, I haven't gained access," Ansa said. "It's rather well iced up." "Keep on it. We simply must have that," Bren again thought. They were trying to access any engineering specs, anything regarding the technology to steal. "It's sensitive. I can't brute force it without," Ansa protested. "If it is one thing I know you can do under pressure, it is crack security software. Keep on it," Bren silently ordered. "Okay," she said, obviously a little hurt by his curtness. Just then, my console began to add data to the screen. The ship's new orders had arrived. "She's ordered to load up and go back to Arcana," I said. What seemed only a day of travel to us was at least 2 months back home. The orders given to Narswa, however, betrayed that support was needed in Arcana. Red grinned. "The Black Fleet no doubt kicked him hard in the nuts," he joked. "Yes, no doubt. Good," Brent said, and as I watched, his eyes darted about. He was walking quickly. "I'm coming back. I think she's good and soft for them, at least I hope so." Suddenly, there was a shout. It was careless of Bren to laugh and to speak. "You there!" a voice in Trike could be heard. Bren glanced behind him and I saw the face of a Trike ordering him to stop. There was a hatch I could lead him to 3 decks up. There was another a deck below. My heart raced as Bren simply stopped and approached the guard. He showed all signs of subordination, and so the others seemed to ignore what was going on. Only the officer stood before him, puzzled by him. "You. Who are you? What were you speaking? Who were you speaking to? Who are you?" The guard said. "I am Ensign 5th Engineer. How might I serve?" Bren said, lowering his costumed orange eyes and bowing his head. "Come with me," the officer barked and sniffed. Bren bowed, raised his hands in a gesture of agreeable surrender, and then peeked over the shoulder of the officer, a slight glance undetected. No one was around. Bren then brought his arms down quickly to his chest, and in a cold and blurred motion unsheathed his pistol and shot it twice, 2 tightly controlled bursts. The blast silenced. The guard burst grotesquely, and Bren ran. "Upstairs!" I hissed. "Bren, upstairs!" But he did not go that way. He passed the stairs and was running instinctively back to the cargo bays. His heart was beating like a hunted rabbit's. "How's it look, Josh?" he asked. Adrenaline coursed in me, and my hands were sweating as I focused on switching my virtual viewpoints to scan the camera arrays. In that moment of violence, I now understood my function. "Bad. 3 others have already found the body," I gasped, referring to what was left of the man Bren killed. I was shocked by the power of the G-Riot pistol, how it tore the Trike utterly and savagely to pieces. "Stop!" I yelled at Bren, noticing a camera was keyed on the area he was running to. I switched its target to empty lengths of corridor to better obscure Bren's presence from Narswa Command, who had still not been alerted to our intrusion. "Okay," I commanded, and Bren ran. I shuddered.
"Calm down, Josh. You don't have to yell. He can read your thoughts, so focus them,"
Ansa reminded me. The alarms then sounded, turning our blood to ice. Ansa gasped.
"Oh, shit. Okay."
Now she shuddered. Red unstrapped himself from the pilot's chair and sat over Ansa. "Kill all those fucking cameras, Josh," he shouted, and I did, and the entire security camera array went black. "You run those viruses of yours, and fuck the FTL. We got to prepare to scramble out of here," Red shouted. "No, Ansa, stay on FTL. Don't listen to him," Bren argued. "You get out of that goddamn ship, Edgewood. The mission is scrapped," Red yelled. "You're not giving the orders, pilot. Ansa, FTL, now!" I can keep them busy here. And you...
Enough! I will not comply. Do as Red says. I'm killing her.
No! Bren screamed as he ran to where I directed him through focused thought feed. Through the feed, Bren could also get the impression of Ansa's intention. Ansa apparently had enough of Bren's suicidal tendencies, and she defiantly dumped all she prepared for us as a failsafe, something to slow Narswa down for months, maybe indefinitely. She had me run the scripts, programs that ran thousands of other programs, and then the disciplined sequences she cautioned me to follow. It was ingenious, as we had more control of the ship than command, and her technical chaos spell of course exempted us from the attack. Soon Narswa was belabored by a cocktail of viruses that crashed a multitude of their systems, ate software, and burned hardware. To Bren's disappointment, the Trikes would more than likely find and undo Bren's sabotage job. We could feel him seething as he desperately fled. Yes, we lost the opportunity to destroy Narswa along with her next payload, and the long game was cut very short, but Bren no longer had a motivation to stay within the vessel.
We'll see you back aboard, Major,
Ansa said. Bren, I said, if you get to Deck 9, there's another battery hatch. On it. Decompressed? Yes, already started it, I said. I could see and hear Bren running, climbing, and then struggling. A turbulent picture of fighting amid sounds of the gurgling of his opponents. His vitals were sky high. He was an excellent fighter. I then heard the rustling of his putting on a spacesuit, and then, I'm in.
It's just a straight drop,
Ansa said.
Can you see our blip?
I can't, he started, but then there was the sound of gunfire, and Bren's muffled pistol, and then a long sigh, breathing. All visuals were a blur. Then in the data exchange provided by the Sci-Tech, there was a tangible, though brief sensation of pain, an ache in my own shoulder. I can't make it. I took one, it's real bad, just go, Bren said. Bren, no! Both Ansa and I cried. Red stood, and he thrust a foot into the leg of a black pressure suit. I'm gonna get him, he said as he entered the decompression unit in the tether. Just go, Khoridian, Bren growled. Ansa decompressed the chamber and opened the hatch.
Can you see him? She was trembling.
Oh, yeah. Just hanging by a thread off the edge there. He's out of the line now. Red shouldered a long length of canvas rope with magnets on the end for grapplers. Red jumped straight up into the darkness and through the magnet against the hull of Narswa. He floated upward, the rope letting out until it yanked at him. He then placed a magnetized glove hand against the hull. He yanked the rope hard, and the grappler shot his direction. He caught it, and then repeated the procedure. Brenne. Where would you be without old Red by your side? He joked. Bren did not respond. Oi, Bren! I say, can you see me? I'm coming right for you. Red, is that you? Aye, 'tis me, man. Just float to me. Stubborn Joel. And I heard Bren push off, and Red say after an uncomfortable silence, Gotcha! Red then pulled himself down the hull, back toward us. Ansa, he asked, is it all confused business inside?
Yes, A complete systems failure. There's not a door or a light switch that's working properly, she said.
Good. Maybe we've got time. So does the Black Fleet now, in case you want a bellyache about failing this mission and such. Hey, answer. Brent's bleeding like a stuck sow, so I hope you can do a field dressing when I get back inside with him. I heard the thud of Red's boots on the tether, and then the sound of the chamber decompressing. Red removed their suits. I helped bring Bren into the main cabin where Ansa immediately began to work on Bren's wound. I then noticed that the feeds on Narswa flickered as systems struggled to get back online. In a flicker of camera, I saw 2 suited Trican guards were looking down from where Bren was last seen. They were looking down at us. In the feed, though the G-150 was still invisible, the ropes that Red repelled with floated outside. Red, I think they know where we are, I said. Red then jumped into the pilot's seat as I unlocked the tether and released us into free space. What do you think you're doing? Bren complained. Saving our lives, I yelled. We rocketed away, only to see 2 fighters chasing us. They fired, missing. We could hear Bren groaning as Ansar removed the slug in his shoulder and hurriedly bandaged him as Red spun the craft around evasively. Somehow the fighters had a fix on us. 40% invisible, my ass! Red growled. He spun the craft wildly to evade our pursuers. There was an explosion and an alarm. Red lights flashing. Red text displayed against our vision. Warning. Hull breached. Warning. Get him into a pod, Red said, then looked at me. You two. What? I said. We got to abandon ship, Josh. There was another explosion. Steam. Heat. The acrid smell of chemicals burning. Warning. Hull breached. Critical. Warning. Josh, get in a pod already. They're keyed to the surface below. We'll meet up, he said, pointing to his eye to the GPS.
Let's go, Josh,
Ansa yelled after securing Bren into his pod and heading for her own. I glanced at him through the shield window of the pod. He was now conscious and looking at me. He winked to reassure me, then a pathetic hand gesture. Thumbs up. I shook the irony off. In that moment, I accepted that this was it. The last time I would look Bren Edgewood in the eye ever again. And the urgency, for the moment, only allowed for that one weak and poorly performed gesture. Thumbs up. I ripped the trike rig out of the dash and crawled to the cylindrical pod assigned to me and climbed in. Red did the same. With another soul-crushing explosion, rather a testament to the hardiness of the G-150, I was thrown outward, launched further into oblivion, spinning, hurtling beyond Narswa. The huge ship was now but a mere dark impression, shrinking before the eyes of my consciousness. Surely I was a dead man. But no. The pod shook violently, skipping off the atmosphere, the sounds like that of a hurricane against thick plastic windows. I passed out. When I awoke, all was white.